Hi everyone, welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's Community Talk Show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and today on this show we have Catherine Stephan. Catherine is the Executive Director at Yellow Barn, a truly unique international center for chamber music here in Putney. It explores and defines the edges and the expanse of chamber music, bringing musicians and audiences together for the joy of exploration, learning, and listening. Catherine spent 20 years as a performing cellist and has been a nonprofit arts advocate and administrator. She served as the executive director of the Boston Modern Orchestra Project, and she's been a consultant and guest lecturer at many places, including the New England Conservatory. So, big welcome to you today, Catherine.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Yes, it's wonderful to have you on. And you're in a little concert studio up at Greenwood School, which is one of your collaborators in town.
Yes,
Yeah.
this is one of our practice and rehearsal studios that Yellow Barn created up here at the Greenwood School, which allowed us to move back here in 2008. So every time I come into one of these studios, it's a little homecoming.
Oh, that's nice.
Beautiful place to work. It's truly incredible.
It looks absolutely lovely. And now that it's springtime too, it's nice to be there. I bet. Yeah, that's great. Well, Catherine, you were born in the Midwest. You know, it's always interesting to hear where people were born and where their roots are. And you spent a lot of time actually in Santa Fe as well with your grandparents.
That's right. Yes. When people ask me where I'm from, I always have to take a moment and explain in a sort of circuitous way. So technically I was born in Hartford, but before I had my first birthday, we moved to the Midwest. And we stayed there until about halfway through my first grade year.
Yeah.
And in many ways, I like to say that that's where I'm from, even though in first grade we moved back to Connecticut, and that is technically where I grew up. But in many ways, my family was a Midwestern island in Fairfield County, and it really is near and dear to my heart. But you know, where you do live does influence you, and being on the East Coast, you know, there's no question that it shaped my life in many wonderful ways, including in music. I don't know that I would have had the same life if I'd been in the Midwest.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it, to know that we don't know what might have happened.
It's true. We don't know how much is fate.
You started doing music at a really early age.
Yes, actually in second grade, I started playing the cello. It was just by chance. They sent around a flyer in my school, you know, offering music lessons. I had a friend who played the violin, I believe, was part of, you know, the reason, but my family, I don't remember this, but my family says that I picked the cello because I wanted to sit down. And so they would probably want me to tell that story. Yes, one thing led to another, and I stayed with it for many, many years.
Yeah, and one thing that you mentioned is as you got older, you got larger cellos, which, you know, not being a musician, it's not something I would normally have thought of, but I think that's kind of wonderful, you know, to be able to grow up and to go on to the next larger instrument.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, growing up, there are always measuring sticks, right? Whether it's the, you know, the height that you have to be to get on an amusement park ride, or, you know,
That's right.
or in my case, you know, a succession of cellos. And admittedly, my final cello is not even, it's barely a full-size cello. So when people say it's almost as big as you are, in my case, it's actually true.
And you continued with the cello for many years.
Yes, I did. I continued all the way through college. I was actually going to go to graduate school for cello performance, and then in the 11th hour, I decided instead to become an advocate for musicians, and that's when my life took a turn.
In college, you studied English literature, and you actually talked about how the language, you were learning new languages by reading English literature. Can you expand on that a little bit?
It's true, and it's ironically I'm terrible at foreign languages. I've tried to learn foreign languages, and I admittedly I'm terrible. I can mimic an accent, but I really cannot seem to learn foreign languages. But to me, every book that I explored was a different language, and so I think, whether it I remember being obsessed with James Joyce when I was in college, and when you can take words and create new words out of them, that is a type of new language, even though all of it is technically English. So
Mhm.
it definitely is a way of traveling. Even
Yes.
yeah.
Well, that's a good way of putting it, and I think also it's it's auditory as well for you. I mean, to reading it, but I wonder if there was something about the cadence of the language that that came in almost as music.
Definitely. Absolutely there again, just thinking of the Joyce, when you hear him read his work, it
Mm,
makes so much more sense in some ways. It makes a lot more sense. And you hear a trend in the rhythm. And that's certainly true, I think, in certain compositions, the language influences things, whether it's a vocal piece or
yes.
not. It is similar.
I love the idea of going back and listening to Joyce because things might be much clearer if I tried that.
Yes.
When you got to the point of going on to a graduate degree, you were saying that you had you kind of took a different path than you were expecting to take. Where were
It's
you headed?
true. Well, I would like to say that it was a well-considered decision, but for me, I think I just avoid making decisions that close doors. And for the
Mm-hmm.
longest time, I kept two paths open. And so I went to a liberal arts college instead of a conservatory, but I studied at a conservatory while I was at my liberal
Mm,
arts college. And so at a certain point, I thought, okay, I have to choose. And at that moment, cello performance felt like it would be my passion. But my passion, I realized, and like I said at the 11th hour, literally withdrew my spot. Um, that my passion is not in performance.
mm.
It's actually a different part of the equation, and there's no question that it was the right decision because, you know, right now I'm a non-practicing cellist. I would say a former cellist, but I've been told to, not say it quite that bluntly. So I say I'm a non-practicing cellist. So it definitely was the right decision for me. And now I love being an advocate for music and musicians. It's
Yes.
incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, yeah. And you were at some point, I think, thinking about going into elder care or art design, two also very different things.
Yeah, at the end of my tenure with Boston Modern Orchestra Project, I was actually going to take a different direction. There's a certain amount of burnout at that point,
Mm-hmm.
and two other paths that I had really started to pursue outside of work. One of them was hospice care.
Mm-hmm.
I was a hospice volunteer in Boston for many, many years, and considered going into being an advocate for elders. Um, and I was also considering going in a more visual direction because I actually consider myself a more visual person than a musical person.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I loved all through my career, and I continue to love, is translating the mission of an organization visually,
Mm-hmm.
whether that be through graphic design or in some other way. So I always very much enjoyed that aspect of being a director, where you're an
Mm-hmm.
art director for the design that sticks with people. You can't
Me
People
too.
are so drawn by visuals. We can't escape it. So
Yes, that's right.
it was something I really enjoyed, yeah.
Yeah, and it's also kind of interesting. I mean, it's sort of the same kind of thing of your appreciation of literature. Both auditory and reading and learning a
Mm.
new language and presenting a visual depiction of an organization, and trying to get to the heart of that. But you didn't go into either of those things, although you carried the art and design certainly into Yellow Barn. I think for anyone who has seen the flyers around town, we recognize them. They're always different. They're always really dynamic and beautiful. And I think that it also, um, I think it draws people in to wondering, what's going on. This is not just a regular organization that is doing musical
Mhm.
performances. And
Well, that's great to hear.
yeah, well,
That's
I think the art definitely depicts that, which is really exciting.
well,
Um,
I have to credit our designer, who's someone I've worked with for over 20 years now, and he and I really see eye to eye on that endeavor of
yeah,
translation.
I'd love for you to be able to describe your job. Executive director.
So would I. But go ahead.
I can leave it at that. It's very interesting because I know, there have been a lot of executive directors that have come on the show, directors, people in charge. And I know that ultimately you're kind of doing everything, or at least you've got your antenna out for everything that's going on. But yeah, as far as Yellow Barn goes, if you could just give us a little idea of what your work entails.
Well, I think I'll just tell you what's different about being a director here, and it's something that I feel very fortunate about, and that is that while there's a very clear role for an executive director, I have an opportunity to be very creative within that role.
Hmm.
And there are some sort of more artistic partnerships that I've been able to explore. So what my job is, well, I think to be a good director, you should be able to do everything, and then hopefully delegate as much as possible, depending on how much staff you have at any given time. I enjoy every aspect of my position. That's one reason why I did go into decided to, instead of specializing on one particular aspect of arts administration, I was really always much more interested in being a director,
Hmm.
because you have variety
Yeah.
in your position.
It would be interesting for folks to hear a little bit about the philosophy behind Yellow Barn, the philosophy, and also, of course, the founders, David and Janet Wells.
Okay, there's a lot there.
There's a lot. Yes, I know.
So, um, well, no, let's see. What's interesting about Yellow Barn is that somebody recently said to us, what's one thing that's unique about Yellow Barn is that it didn't miss a step in its development. And I think that's really to the credit of the people who have been directing the organization, whether it was founding the organization and then having a vision for what it is today.
Hmm.
And so with that in mind, one thing is I actually have two Yellow Barn lives, which I don't know if everyone realizes, but I was a student of David Wells, and so I was at Yellow Barn in the mid '90s for I spent 3 summers here, and then came back 15 years later or something as executive director. I was a college student.
College student. Okay.
I was a college student, so
Uh-huh.
pre-graduate school auditions and still very much
Yes.
in the college mindset. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and actually my life with David goes back even further than that. I first met David Wells when I was 10. I went to hear a performance of David's in Connecticut. And I'll never forget that actually, because David, for those who saw him play,
Mm.
he could be ferocious. He was so passionate. He loved music so much. And so as a young cellist, I had never witnessed that kind of just throwing yourself
Mm.
into something, just
Mm.
complete commitment to trying to communicate what the composer had imagined, just determination to connect. And it was overwhelming. But there was another cellist had brought me to the concert, a young woman who was a little older than I was. And she was a student of David's, and so she brought me. And she said, let's go meet David. It's like, 10 years old, I wasn't entirely sure how I felt about this idea, having just witnessed this performance. But we went backstage and she introduced me, and David he looked at me, and he had such a beautiful smile, and he gave me one of those smiles, and I just remember feeling just immediately, I don't know, I just he brings out the better part of you,
Yeah.
in those moments,
Yeah.
and he was that way later when I went to study with him,
Hmm.
and he was that way. Toward the end of his life, I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time with him also.
Oh,
So,
good.
yeah.
That's
So
wonderful.
David's spirit was obvious to me when I was at Yale. Barn, and it's still present. Even when I came
Mhm.
back 15 years later, it's still very present.
Mhm.
Yellow Barn is very different now in many ways than it was then.
Yes.
But that spirit of just loving music is
Yes.
probably one of the most palpable elements of Yellow Barn,
Yeah.
especially life here on campus and the exchange of ideas. All of it is for that goal. But
Yeah.
the philosophy at Yellow Barn now, I think, I don't know if I could say it's different than it was then, because I don't know that we really had a philosophy. Back when I was at Yellow Barn, it was much more sort of a freewheeling adventure. But
Yeah.
there is an intentional philosophy here now, which has a lot to do. A lot of people comment on Yellow Barn's programming, but it's not just programming for programming's sake. There's an effort to listen in new ways and give people ways to listen that are different, to allow different musics to speak to each other, over centuries of chamber music history,
Hmm.
even to allow people to explore different ideas of what chamber music might be.
Hmm.
It's a lot
Yes.
of people just have one image when you say it's a chamber music festival. They have one idea that might come from their own childhood, or some other preconceived notion. And I think, at least for me, and now we'll just talk more personally about me at Yellow Barn concerts as opposed to our stated goals and mission statement. But for me, when I'm at Yellow Barn concerts, I'm really struck by the fact that chamber music is mostly defined about a way of interpreting and listening. The communication is so different in a chamber music setting than it might be, in a solo setting or in an orchestral format or
Hmm.
an opera format or other theater format. There's something about an exchange of ideas. There's sort of a democracy, I guess, if you will,
Hmm.
between musicians. There's sort of a natural transfer of power from one person to the other, and a taking responsibility for your role, and you have your own agency, but then without really, very, in the best situations like a Yellow Barn, very seamlessly handing that power back and forth. And
Right.
that's, to me, that's very moving,
Hmm.
especially at a place like Yellow Barn, where I feel musicians are able to be their better selves, in the sense that they can leave so much at the door before
Right.
they come here. And then they
Yes.
spend 5 weeks in residence, you know, and that's an incredible time for them and for all of us who are able to witness it.
Yeah.
This way of having a life with music, and
Yes.
then
And
to
I
have
feel
performances that come out of that life.
right. And I
It's
think
very
that,
different.
being in the audience, one feels that, that it is a community, that you as musicians have formed a community, and everyone on staff involved. And then coming into this very intimate space. It's a beautiful
Mhm.
space. And for folks in the audience, it's on Main Street, Putney, just down or up, depending on where you're coming from, right between the co-op and the library in downtown Putney. The other thing is musicians working together for the joy of working together. That's another thing that
Absolutely.
really comes through. And uh, I wonder, because it is you are doing such experimental work, and things that are very outre, and not at all what, certainly what I thought of as chamber music. So it is stretching, it is, and is asking us to stretch as well. You've collaborated, Yellow Barn has collaborated with so many people locally, Sandglass Theater and Next Stage and the Putney Library, and also further afield as well, with Seth as the musical director and you as the executive director, and all these other folks I know who are playing a part in bringing music to the people. You've come up with so many really creative ideas. One of which is Music Hall, and that's music, HAUL. I think folks in the community have probably seen this truck going by, that's beautifully painted, and it says Music Hall on it. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So Yellow Barn Music Hall, we created in 2015.
Hmm.
We sometimes joke that this is our child because it literally took 9 months to create, and at times is unruly, but is always fun,
Kept you
and
up
it's
at night?
always but is always full of surprises. And we created, but in all seriousness, we created Yellow Barn Music Hall so that we could go anywhere with what we were able to do. So, for example, Yellow Barn Music Hall has played in open fields, it's played on playgrounds, street corners, plazas, it's been in art districts, and it's been in rural Maine. It's been as far west as Dallas. It's spent a lot of time on the East Coast, from Maine to Baltimore, many residencies in New York City and in Boston. So it's definitely a vehicle that allows us to connect outside of where we are, but in the same way as how we try to connect here.
Yes.
There is a connection that I think audiences experience in the Big Barn. However, there are limits to that. And there's something that happens, at least in my opinion, there's something that happens with doorways, and when someone can choose to listen and knowing that they can then walk away,
Yeah.
so there isn't that sort of internal dialogue that happens when we make a choice to go to a concert.
Mhm.
It is the very first traveling stage of its kind. It's a fully equipped concert venue. And so when we unfold and we can deploy Music Hall in 15 minutes in any environment, it is something, I think, that it's a magical moment for someone to see their playground or their street corner or their grocery store parking lot, transformed in that way.
Yes.
And it's the way people listen, and that in those moments is very different. I
Yes.
find it's very fundamental, that connection between performer and listener.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful thing to watch, and it's especially wonderful when we have young families and children they're just automatically drawn to it. We've been on playgrounds during recess, and they have the option of either being with us or go playing on the jungle gym, and every time they gravitate toward the
Yeah.
performance, and that's a really wonderful thing to see.
It's really quite magical, because you come in to, say, a playground and you park and you open these doors and then it kind of rolls out. You roll out the stage, the doors open, you've got, there's a little painted sky above it. And it's sort of like a flash mob kind of thing, you know?
Okay,
And
true.
and you've got an audience that's kind of taken by surprise.
Our first New York City tour, I think we had 80 musicians or something performing on Music Hall over the course of 10 days.
Yes.
And that's something that family of musicians is something that's truly unique to Yellow Barn.
Yeah.
And so to be able to bring that outside of Putney and, to reach a broader audience, it does feel like we are serving some need that
Yes,
we would
yes.
otherwise be able to serve. But we also really feel that it allows us to connect locally in a way that we can't always do. There are only 120 seats in the Big Barn,
Right, right,
so
right, right. Pandemic.
yeah,
Yeah, during the pandemic, it was a welcome sight in so many different places, and seeing it
yeah.
going down the road, knowing it was going somewhere where people could actually be there with each
Mhm.
other and see music.
But yeah, we always wanted Music Hall to feel like it was part of this community, that it was something that would be there for whoever needed it to be. So whether that was the groundbreaking of NECA, or most recently being in the 8th grade graduation parade for Putney Central School, which was so much fun,
Oh,
or
nice.
any other sort of town event where we can be helpful and be a presence.
Yeah.
We wanted the town to feel that it's their truck in a way. This would have been late March last year. Late March last year. The first thing we did was to put banners on Music Hall that said "Music is essential," and we started what then became known as sort of Music Hall's relief tour, and we went
Right.
to food distribution sites. We went to places where we knew that people were housebound, whether they be residential homes or hospitals. We went and played for healthcare workers, or any number of places. I think there were probably about 30 places that we we would go to regularly and perform music just to provide relief. So
Yeah,
that's
well, it's a real community service and a wonderful community service during COVID for people. And also during this time, you had a wonderful little project called the Beethoven Walks Trail, and that was up around Greenwood School. And yeah, could you describe that a little bit for us?
sure. So this is really Seth Knopp's brainchild. Beethoven Walks is intended to be a submersive experience in the sense that there, and for those who haven't seen it, there are hundreds of reproductions of Beethoven's autograph manuscripts and sketches. Um, we're so fortunate that there are so many of them available. And so we reproduced them on sort of banner material and then used bungee cords to attach them to trees at all different heights and off into the woods, some very
Yeah.
close to the trail, some off into the woods.
Mhm.
And we created an app for your phone so that at certain points on the trail, you listen, you play something on your phone and just listen while you're walking, or maybe there's at some places, there are places to sit and listen
Mm.
and just be surrounded not only by the music, but also by the woods and also by Beethoven's autograph manuscripts and sketches. And I think it is transporting. A lot of people felt that way and told
Yes.
us that was
Yeah.
what was happening. And
Yeah, I think it was a brilliant idea, amazing idea, and very, very moving to be part of as well. And you're in nature, and
mhm.
the trees are all around you as this music is in your ears. It was brilliant. Your summer series, which will be 5 weeks as usual this summer, it looks like it's going to be kind of a normal summer. We'll see what happens in terms of all of the requirements, but you're planning on the 5 weeks, and that's going to be July 9th through August 7th. There'll be lots of info up and around about that, and we'll also have the information to your website at the end of the show. So
Wonderful.
thank you for sharing all this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and
Yeah,
hope to see you this summer.
yes, absolutely. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for being with us. This was a fun show, and also we're in spring now. Everything is blossoming. It's one of the most beautiful springs I think we've ever had, and now we have Yellow Barn to look forward to this summer in July and August. So stay tuned for those dates and for what the schedule is going to be like. Um, I think that so many of us are just so glad to be a little bit more out and around, maybe not quite rubbing elbows, but getting pretty darn close to that. So we will see you next week, and thanks so much for being with us.